Not just the mercy watchers, but everybody. Hi, everybody. Today we have with us a fascinating scholar and deacon of the church. It is Dr. Bob Hesse. And I'm so excited to talk with him today because it's fascinating, the field that he delves into. And he's going to be teaching a class right here at the University of St. Thomas. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Richard.
Great to see you.
I'm
Thanks
glad
for
to be
being here
This
with
is
us
great.
today. Yeah, so one of the questions I like to ask our guests in the hot seat, it's not so hot, but yeah, it's a seat.
I feel it.
There you go. Awesome. Talk to me. What is your definition of innovation?
Thinking outside the box, paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. The biggest innovations are paradigm shifts from the classical thinking.
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, I love that because you're not detailed in that, and you give a wideness, an openness, right, to let the people explore, to innovate. I mean, that's essentially it, outside of the paradigms, the frames that we normally think. And so your work and your book and your research are all innovative, right? So tell me about how science and faith work together or work in opposite directions sometimes with innovation, and how your book, this book right here, shameless plug, right? How it sort of captures that interplay of science and faith and innovation.
Well, the book is both a textbook and a memoir, and so it was partly a capturing of my own journey to return to my faith through science, and basically. I never said I was no longer Catholic. It's just that if somebody asked me, I would have said, yes, I'm Catholic, but I wasn't practicing for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I rediscovered my faith through science. And basically, faith and science are approaching asymptotically. Now, it's a fancy word. It's a word to say basically they're infinitely approaching, but will never touch because they're answering different questions. But I started to see the synergy. And it just stunned me, and I got so tired of hearing people say that they are in contradiction, and they're not. And that's the beauty of the excitement, of the awe of the discovery as I went along in my journey.
So when you said that, it made me think of an image, and that is a magnet, right? So a lot of times magnets will just clasp onto each other, right? But also you get the right magnets, and they're sort of opposed. They create a field that doesn't let it touch. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that science and faith complement one another in a certain way. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, science is really answering a question of how, a faith question of why. But the more you understand the how, the more you start to realize the why behind it. Yeah. So it's a fascinating dance, and ultimately it leads to a real appreciation for God's love for us. Yeah. That's the bottom line of the journey through science.
How incredible! You know, that's one of the things I think a lot of times folks create in the sort of the secular conversation, this opposites, right, between faith and science, and really they work together, right? That's
absolutely. When I do homilies, I put science quite often in the homilies, and quite often it's the younger people that are fascinated by that because they're not hearing it. Yeah. And it's also the secular world that's misinforming them of the conflict between the two that doesn't exist.
It's all a revelation in different ways.
Yeah.
Yes? So one of the things I noticed in the book is that the foreword was written by Father Spitzer. Tell us about that, your relationship maybe with him. How'd that all come about?
Amazing guy. I mean, brilliant.
Yes.
He gave a presentation to the deacons here in Houston. I listened to him, and I asked one or two questions from the audience. He answered them. I bought two of his books. I went up and put them in front of him for his sign. I said, well, I'd like for you to sign it. And it was only then I realized he was blind.
That's right.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. And with time, he ended up writing the foreword. And I thought, how in the world? When I read the foreword, I thought, my gosh, he captured the book. How did he do that when he's blind? There's no audio yet.
Yeah.
And I called his assistant, and she said I read the book to him all day. And I thought, and he, at the end of the day, she said he dictated the foreword without changes. I thought, how do you do this?
It's incredible.
So his mind is way ahead of mine, I'm going to tell you.
He is an absolute star. Well, and in my situation with low vision, he's someone I look up to. Pardon the pun, but I look up to him, and see his great gifts of leadership and just engagement with the world, and certainly. He's one of those rare examples where people are gifted.
Well, he asked me to be on the faculty of the Magis Center, which he started.
Yes.
But he will, if you talk to him privately, or he doesn't tout it a lot, but his loss of his sight was a big part of his spiritual journey. Absolutely key to his spiritual. Back to the suffering. Back to the suffering.
Well, and in my own experience, one of the things I think it is a blessing in some ways because it has made me surrender to the ambiguities of life, right? So how did all this start? I mean, what got you interested in this particular genre, field, book, study, all that? How did you get started in that?
That's a good question. As I said, I wasn't practicing my faith, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but that's part of the spiritual journey I was on. And basically, I started to run into suffering. Isn't that what drives a lot of people? If anybody gave us an example of that, it was Jesus. How to suffer
Indeed.
and resurrect from it. So my wife suffered from bipolar condition. I saw suffering in so many places, and I started to look for solutions. I thought I was in control. And we all
labor under that delusion.
I was a late learner, okay? And so in a search for if you're going to be in control, you got to take responsibility, not just the good things, but also the things that go to hell in a handbasket, as they say. So in that struggle of illness and not seeing that I could control or help, it caused me to start looking within science. That was my default.
Right.
And then I started to see God in the science. It was, it started with when I was a child, physics to creation. These are kind of the main 4 chapters of the book. Physics to creation, chemistry to life, biology to consciousness, and psychology to mysticism. And so that search led me in that direction. That's why it was a natural progression to end up with mysticism and having God's presence palpable. And it actually loops back to the physics. It's a fascinating discovery that I had in me that led me back to God.
Going back to the beginning of your thought there, where suffering, right? Isn't it ironic how oftentimes suffering is a gateway to clarity, to purity, to those sorts of things. You mentioned certainly Jesus suffering and his ultimate victory over death. I think in a more contemporary space within the last 20 years or so of the great witness that St. Pope John Paul II gave us near the end of his life, where there was such public suffering that he shared, that gives yet hope always is there.
It's hope, but it's ultimately surrender to the unknown. And my image of God was shifting constantly until it came to the point where it was the unknowable, ineffable. And that journey is what was exciting for me to go through, and why I wrote it down, basically.
So one of the things, you wear many hats, right? But one of the things that I know you are involved with, a creator of, I think, is the Contemplative Network.
Yes.
Right? And so tell us a little bit about that and how your research on a scientific basis sort of informs what the Contemplative Network is.
Well, what happened is, as my journey led into mysticism, and I had a mystical experience, which was a blessing. It's a gift. It's not something I sought or earned, whatever. But I started then to get involved in teaching contemplative prayer to many, many people. And that was about the time I was coming back into the diaconate, studying to be a deacon. So I not only came back to the church, but then
you went all in.
I went all in.
I'm just going to become clergy. All right.
And so once that started, I started to see the healing taking place in the people I was teaching this to. And being a scientist and believing in what St. Augustine of Hippo said was, a miracle is not an exception to the laws of nature. It merely means that we don't know the laws of nature completely. And so I was on a search for the laws of nature completely. So not calling God's miracle an exception to the laws of nature, I came to realize that this is the miracle. It's creation itself. Yes. And so when I started to see all that healing, I co-founded an organization called Contemplative Network with a very blessed good friend, Kimball Kehoe, and he was a former Jesuit and taught at Rice in business school, got his doctorate from Harvard in business, and brilliant guy, but he recently passed away. And he was the chairman of the organization. I was the president, and it was founded 11 years ago, and basically it's evolved now from a all-volunteer into a fundraising and effort to basically pay for the research we're doing. I said, we're here in the largest medical center in the world by multiple times and the most culturally diverse city in the country. And this is the perfect place to do this. And so the research started at the Institute for Spirituality and Health, where we did a contract with Baylor College of Medicine, but that was on discursive prayer. I was more interested in contemplative prayer.
Right.
And so, that was a stepping stone, and it's an evergreen agreement we're going to try to capitalize on. There are three legs to the organization. One, we teach now more of a oneness prayer, because in the contemplative tradition, all the major faiths have it. Kabbalah and Judaism, Sufism and Islam and mysticism and Christianity. And they all have very similar basis on the prayer practice, because it's in the silence that there's no dogma. And so in that process, we decided to not only teach the prayer, but then do research on the healing effects of the prayer that are really God's effects. But we did it because we needed to convince the secular world that you may not believe in a God, but here's the research. You can't discount this as a healing tool to help people. And then once the research is completed, setting up ministries to teach it to at that particular group. So we just finished research on palliative care and lessening the fear of death by doing brain scans on people to show the common attributes of near-death experiences and mystical experiences, which are almost always pleasurable. And so that reduces the fear of death. We're working on Parkinson's now, and I got to tell you, I've seen some things happen in Parkinson's that just blow your mind. In the middle of a Parkinson's freeze, teaching a man and having him go down and be quiet out of his freeze. It's called a freeze in Parkinson's.
Oh, really?
And so there's healing taking effect. It's not a cure, but it helps people deal with their illness. Depression, my wife was bipolar. I saw it in her. So God was calling us to do something bigger than Bob, because Bob was the center of the universe before, and now suddenly it was no longer.
Universe of Bob. Well, that was one of the questions that I had, was the research and it's, are there any other examples? You give us a couple already, right? Where the research is showing a correlation, and in some cases a causation, perhaps, of a healing event or healing moments, or the situation becoming better for the person. Are there any others that you can think of?
Well, PTSD is a good example. And I taught it to 10 people one time. I've been doing it for a long time. It was in the Trappist tradition. I learned it at a Trappist monastery. And Father Keating was my mentor at that. And so I learned it there, and been teaching it to a lot of different people. So I taught it to 10 people, and a few months later, I ran into a man I had taught it to. I didn't know him that well. I said, "How's it going?" And he said, "Well, something serious happened. during the prayer, I suddenly became fully aware of what happened to me in Vietnam.
Oh.
Now, I didn't question the details. It was clearly a PTSD moment. And I said, "What did you do?" Well, he did what the heart of the prayer is, and it's not rocket science. It's basically you choose a sacred word or image, and preferably a word if you're a beginner, and you go silent for 20 minutes, and every time you become aware of your thoughts or become aware you're engaging your thoughts, you ever so gently return to the sacred word. That's a symbol of your desire to be with God. So what you're saying without saying anything, you're saying, I would rather be with you, God, than my own thoughts. And that gives the brain, the unconscious part of the brain, the ability to download to the conscious, because the conscious brain now is being suspended of all the ruminations it normally goes through. So in that process, the person becomes aware that they're able to now deal with this. God knows that they're ready to deal with that PTSD moment. And so when he told me, I so gently let it go, returned to God.
Wow.
I dropped. I couldn't believe it. I said, this is a research we should do. So we put together a research project for the VA hospital. You know?
Well, that's so here at the University of St. Thomas, we have, of course, really strong departments in theology and philosophy and those sort of faith-oriented disciplines. But also we have great strength in sciences, right? The biology, psychology, all the different social and natural sciences. And to put this together in a way where research shows a nexus, a connection between those is just fascinating. Yeah. So one of the things that I think about is this research and your being a deacon at the same time. How is that helped, hurt? What is that dynamic like?
Well, it's ironic. I was first asked to, knowing that I was teaching a course on faith and science, I was asked by the deacons in Cuba to come down there and talk to them on
really?
faith and science in general. So like the book is only a part of it is dedicated to the mysticism and the research. But I went down there, and that's where we ended up doing a lot of the research. Because I could afford to do it there. So, and I was able to enter because I was a deacon. So the Holy Spirit, well, it was not just a deacon, but there was a cultural exchange treaty with Cuba that still exists. So I was able to go down there. But God has been forming me in a way that I never dreamed I would utilize in different ways.
And to take you places maybe you never thought of going.
So I'm going to be teaching the course here, and then also at the Pontifical University in Rome, using the book as a textbook. So
excellent. So well, that's incredible. Terrific. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Deacon Bob Hesse.